just about to walk into what's called muskeg, which is like swamp. And that is a very good place to find dry firewood. But of course that's the breeding ground for these billions of insects that populate this area during the summer months. Black flies and mosquitoes plague every warm-blooded creature around here. In the 1950s, the Canadian government carried out tests and discovered that an exposed forearm could be bitten 280 times in just 1 minute. So my bug jacket may make things hot and sweaty, but it's an essential item of clothing. It said firewood makes you warm 3 times. First, collecting it. Secondly, shifting it. And third, when you burn it. I'm going to make a bannock, which is an unleavened bread, which is very much the fare of canoe trips. And there are many ways of going about these. I have a very simple recipe. It's 2 parts of flour, 1 part milk powder. But I'm going to add in another ingredient today because I'm making a cake-like bannock. I'm going to add some powdered egg. Unleavened breads like this, breads that don't involve yeast, are very much the fare of the Canadian backwoods. The voyageurs used to make something similar they called a galette, and there were descriptions of that containing everything from the dirt from the cook's hands to dead flies. If I was to make one of those today, I'm sure there'd be a few bit mosquitoes in there. But the key ingredient in all of these really is baking powder. And here in Canada, they have this wonderful ingredient, that baking powder. And that's all the basic ingredients. Oh, there is a dead mosquito in there too. It's only fair enough I get a chance to bite them back. I'm going to also now add a touch of sugar. I'm using brown sugar because I think it gives much better flavour for this sort of outdoor cooking. And when you're on the trail, flavours become very important to you. Some raisins. At the end of the day's travel, drying yourself off, getting the fire going, getting a brew on or a meal cooked is actually rather nice routine of the day, something you look forward to. And, one of the nicer aspects of this sort of travel, really. You don't need this sort of bread, because if you do, punch the gas out of it. It's quite different to making a yeasted bread. So what I want to do is just round that. Push it down, spread it within this pan. Now, what happens now is that this gets tilted towards the fire and a proper stick behind it. We don't use cooking times, cooking like this outdoors, because the temperature, the way the wind is blowing, the amount of moisture in the air, that all affects things. Things are cooked when they're done. And I've got one last ingredient, and this is a real treat: rum. Little tot of rum just on top of it, drizzled, as they say, on top. If you could only smell this. There it is. Bannock. It's unlucky to cut bannock, so you always break bannock. It always takes a couple of days to settle into the journey. Muscles need to acclimatise to the demands of paddling, and the body and mind must adapt to the river. Once you've tuned in, you can paddle for weeks. Although I'm perfectly happy with my own company, it's always good to share an experience like this. For the next few days, I'll be joined by an expert canoeist and good friend, Ray Goodwin. Ray has paddled his way along many of the great rivers of the world, and with his experience on the water, it would be good to have him along. Besides, he'd be able to appreciate my singing.
If you time the comment to the song perfectly, you're going to just distract me. You're doing it too soon. I've seen these rocks.
It's a nice pace of life.
Yeah.
You really do start to feel a part of the landscape. You feel the influences, don't you? The wind and the...
I mean, a lot of the time I like to travel light and very, very fast. But there comes a time when I'm really going to have to make the room to actually do trips like this, where being places is important as the actual destination you're heading for.
Absolutely. C'est la verron, qui mène, qui nous mène, c'est la verron. Something like that.
I'm not going to understand. You just keep going. Very nice.
That rock wasn't there,
Yeah.
because we could go right and come left. Well, that's exactly the wrong place, isn't it?
So we need to have a
The only clear way to assess a rapid is to leave the canoes and take a look from the shore. Ray and I could then decide on the best route through and check for any hidden dangers. When you're hundreds of miles from civilization, the last thing you need is a broken canoe. Where Ray's boat may bounce over the rocks, one mistake here, and this rapid can turn mine to match route.
This rock is underwater. The wave clipped left end of it in that flatter water. Then the other right water. Pick the rock beyond and then shallow stop.
This is on the right as well.
Yeah.
There's more water here.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry?
Done.
Okay. It was great to see Ray in his element. His focus on the canoe was total.
That was nice.
Lovely. Fantastic. Whitewater's always exhilarating. It makes a nice change from the sections where you paddle slowly and you're doing all the motoring of the boat. It's nice the way that the river just picks you up and you feel the current taking, and all of a sudden Having to think 3 or 4 steps ahead. Wakes you up. It's great. Brilliant. Clipped a couple of rocks in there. A little bit of damage to the paddle. Repair that later. That was fun.
That was good.
Voyagers would run as many of these rapids as possible. Time is of the essence, and it's far quicker and easier than carrying everything around. Even without cargo, there's enough to carry, which is why, when canoeing, we must still travel light.
Huh? A song?
I think it's your turn to sing.
No.
Come on,
No.
song.
Most those that know me wouldn't even dream of hearing me sing.
Probably just as well.
Very much so. The thing about this section that I like is we keep getting little rapids, little ripples to push us along. Too much of the flat stuff, and you have to start working.
I don't mind it, because while I enjoy the white water stuff, that's not what the canoe means to me. I think of the canoe as a vehicle, as a means to get me here, to see the other things, really. These riverbanks here, you have all these plants. This is a habitat that's actually missing in Britain. We've so tidied up our rivers, we've forgotten what wild rivers are like. When I come to some of those, it always makes me think of what we've lost. The next day we lost the film crew. The amount of equipment they bring requires a small flotilla of canoes, and they were starting to hinder our progress. There they go. From here on, we just use a small camera, and we'd need to be a lot more self-reliant. Once they get smoke, try to maintain a nice even pressure. Lovely smell from this. Lighting a fire is one of the most crucial survival skills. Equipped with just a knife and a piece of cord, perhaps just a shoelace, it's possible to do this in just a few minutes, but the technique has to be learned. And as with most things, practice, and in my case a lot of practice, has made perfect. Now the notch is full of dust, which is glowing. See it smoking there of its own accord. Whoops, I dropped it. Pick it up. And add him to the tinder that we've prepared, like so. Pinch that in there. And away we go. Okay? And of course that then we can take to our birch bark, and there's our fire. Jade asked me to show him how to do this, and it's not as easy as it can look.
Oops. Frustration.
Bushcraft is all about taking your time, keeping on trying, and not losing your temper. Ray was doing very well at all three. He may have been hot and bothered, but he stuck to his task.
Okay, here we go again.
When I teach this technique on courses, I can easily tell who will succeed and who will not, because more than half of it is in the mind. foot needs to be closer to the drill. Not that close.
No, I'm just trying to get everything balanced.
Yeah. Everybody feels this the first time they do it. Push down with your left hand. Excellent. Keep going. Oh, doing great.
Each time gets closer.
For more than an hour, you persevered.
I thought it was going there.
That's the best yet. And I'm not going to say anything this time, but when you get that going like that, just maintain it. Roll all the way. That's it, relax now, Ray. Just relax. Catch your breath. Are you ready?
Oh!
Pack it tight. Be hard on it.
Fine. Hindi pa. Kakastart. Okay na yan.
So close to your face.
Ay, ito pa.
Harder.
Okay, thank you.
Away from your face or you'll drip on it.
I got flames. I got flames. Houston, we have fire. Absolutely fantastic. Mr. Biggs.
Well done.
Hold on.
One of the things I like about bushcraft is that hidden amongst all of these skills is something else, and that is this business of never giving in. And I think that's what these things teach. Then it's not just about lighting a fire on the ground; it's about lighting a fire within. Now that we were no longer hampered by a crew, we were much less conspicuous and were rewarded almost immediately with the chance to get close to a magnificent moose. By using a bit of paddle and the Indian stroke, we can move absolutely silently. Here's that paddle quite lucky to have it. Today, we use it to get close to them and see. A canoe is the most natural way to travel. So silent, so serene. No wonder animals accept your presence so readily. Memories like this stay with you forever.
can actually see it. Incredible. Anything that flies and doesn't sting, it's going to be a threat.
Journeys like this provide the chance to observe and to learn. There is evidence everywhere of one of the most famous inhabitants of Canada, the beaver. These animals can be quite elusive, but the best time to see them is after the sun has set. With our camp established, I went a little way upriver to see if I could see some. Beaver are amazing animals. It's hard to imagine, but there was a time when there were so few beavers on these rivers because of the traffic that the Hudson's Bay Company actually had to employ engineers to build canals and dams to keep their canoes running, because the beavers had been removed. Who maintained the waterways? So the rise of the beaver continued up to the 1930s. It was then that a half-breed Indian known as Graham set about bringing the plight of this animal to the attention of the world. Graham lived out in the wilds, where he was inseparable from the beaver. He was a prolific writer who captured the essence of life in the wilderness and the plants and animals that lived there. His books sparked imaginations all over the world. One of the most popular, Tales of an Empty Cabin, was typed up by a family friend called Margaret Charcot.
He read stories to us, and he'd say, "How does that sound?" And with him reading the story to you, it didn't sound the same when you read it yourself. It wouldn't have the expression in it, the prose through it, that you would pick up when he would read it to you. He wrote all night, slept in the daytime, and the beavers did. It was on their timetable.
He was so in tune with the beaver that he even shared the log cabin he lived in with them.
It was very rough, and the floor, of course, was quite muddy because the beavers were in and out all the time. And the table, part of it was chewed a bit.
His books brought him lecture tours throughout Britain, where people really bought into the romanticism of this straight-faced, enigmatic Indian and his love for the wild, an image he did nothing to dispel.
If it was a photographer or something she thought would be made public, then he'd get that set face, stern. But he wasn't like that with us at all, because I had lots of pictures of him with a good smile.
But he was keen to play off the Indian stereotype. When he met King George V, it was Greyhound who dictated the protocol, not the king.
He said that the king had to be seated, the royal family had to be seated before he entered. And then he had his grand entry, and no, you can't do that. He said, "Well, that's what I'm doing," and he did. And then when it was over, he slapped the king on the back and said, "I'll be seeing you." But he got away with it.
In fact, he was getting away with far worse. On his death in 1938, it was discovered that Greyhound had been living a lie. He wasn't an Indian at all, but Archie Bellamy from Hastings. You can imagine the uproar. But to me, what matters is how he lived his life and what he did for the wild. He had a profound impact. Years ahead of his time, he preached the word of conservation, and it fell on a receptive audience. And although he wasn't the Native American that he made him claim to be, Canada has never abandoned him. And I think that's all credit to him. He's a remarkable man. And through his efforts, not only was the beaver So, a very musky environment. Be themselves. The next day we decided to stay put. It's good to take the opportunity to clean your kit and catch up with admin, running repairs and the like. And it was a perfect opportunity to involve Ray in a bit more bushcraft. Ray, you've seen me use this saw to collect firewood, but this morning it's going to take on a different meaning as a thing to take with you on a canoe trip. Obviously, a folding saw is convenient because it's safe and easy to transport in the canoe. If you look at the stories of the great explorers who opened up Canada, one of the things that you come across frequently are stories, firstly, of people being turned over in the rapids and losing their equipment, and the other, of course, is people breaking paddles frequently. I think one of the key skills if you're making a canoe journey is being able to replace the paddle if it gets lost or broken. So the first task is to find the right wood. What I really want is a piece of wood long enough to make a paddle with a straight grain, absolute straight grain, and ideally, rather than go into the forest and look for a tree to take down, what we'll look for is a piece of dead wood hung up somewhere on the side of the river. There's plenty of wood around like that. And really the secret here is being able to spot the resource that you need for yourself.
That's the one that's caught my attention. That looks nice and straight, and not too many knots. I'm very conscious of not breaking the blade, and explaining that to Ray wouldn't be so much fun.
A forest like this is full of useful resources, particularly for food and for medicine. Key is learning to spot them. This lichen, for example, in Canada, they often call this old man's beard. And this contains an acid which can be used as an antifungicidal. You can boil this up and use that to treat athlete's foot. It'll be a handy thing when you've been in canoe boots for a month. How'd you get on, Red?
Very good question. Have I got a paddle, or have I got firewood?
Well, I'll give you one answer. You got the right wood.
Well, I couldn't get the smell. It was the look of the thing. So I'm pleased with that.
Now, I imagined that when you looked at it, you saw this fault line. I thought that would be good to split on. But if we split there, we end up with this curve in the wood.
Okay.
What we want is this nice straight section here, this side. And I think if we split through there, we will get that. There she goes. Charcoal from the fire made a useful pencil. And we'll just mark now the outline from this existing paddle. Of course, if you didn't have one, you'd have to guess, wouldn't you? So what we've got now is a line that we can cut down to and actually start to shape the handle. If I cut too deep, we wouldn't have had a paddle at all. And I wanted to make the shaft thicker anyway, as the wood was cedar, which is easy to carve, but not as strong as the wood of a paddle that we used for measuring. I can't stress enough how much easier tasks like this are with the right equipment, well maintained. I use the axe. And I think that this is a key to good axe work, is a sharp axe used with boldness. This is how, this is how paddles were made once. In the old days. My own feeling, you may disagree with me, but I think if someone's got a paddle to do on a wilderness trip, they should know how to do this.
I don't, because I think it's definitely a skill I would like, but at the end of the day, I carry a spare paddle. Everybody I paddle with carries a spare paddle, but I just love watching that paddle come into existence.
All right, I think that is about done. I've left it a bit heavy in places because it's cedar, and it doesn't have the strength of the harder woods. You'll feel it's even a little bit flexible even now. It's a much more delicate wood, but it is very light, and I know you like a light paddle.
Very much so.
Want to give it a try?
Yeah.
Take it for a spin, go on. What do you reckon then? What are your first impressions, right?
It gets the seal of approval.
There you go. Very good one. Maestro of the paddle.
I like it. This was a log this morning.
After his success with firelighting, Ray wanted to give it a go too.
Well, I slept very well, but Ray was up all night trying to carve a paddle, and he ended up with this. Well, it got smaller and smaller. So he's promised that this is a spatula, really, and he's going to use it to make some pancakes this morning. We'll see.
That is going to be the most labour-intensive spatula ever in the history of podcast. Oh, dear, oh dear.
Lovely morning, and we've been planning hard for a few days. It's nice to take some time to relax a little bit. Of course, the voyageurs who came up these rivers, who have a real romance surrounding them, for them life was really hard. They'd have woken up, crack of dawn, somebody would have shouted, "Salve, salve," time to get up. And up they'd get underway before they even had breakfast. It'd be several miles down the river, and then they'd have breakfast, probably cooked the night before. That was the beginning of an 18-hour day travelling. Really hard life. And you have to remember, they weren't just going downriver, they were going up them as well. Quite amazing. Anyway, this morning, pancakes, very traditional canoeing fare. Gives you some bulk in your stomach to get the paddles moving in the morning, and really looking forward to it. Hey!
Oh dear, that's the most anemic pancake I think I've ever cooked. You ready for this, Ray?
Yeah. Bit of butter. Now, the test. Nice and hot. Very nice.
Put the pancakes inside us and rested from our day in camp. We were both eager to get back on the water. Every stretch of this river has its own character, and the next stage was no exception. we were faced with a sequence of rapids of varying size and force. When you're on a journey like this, there are 3 different ways to deal with rapids. The ones that are most fun are the ones you can run, and in some ways, the bigger the better. This is what Ray loves, the challenge of whitewater. I love it too. As we came down, it was fairly straightforward all the way through, and then at the end there were these 3 massive waves waiting to eat you, and one feeds you a little bit right into the next one, which turns you a little bit right into the next one. In a rapid like this, nature tests both your nerve and your skill. Ray couldn't resist showing off on camera by surfing the wave. This takes expert balance and control. I told you, he's a paddle maestro and a little bit crazy. Some rapids just run out of water. I could feel the bottom of my delicate canoe scraping along the rocks. It was time to get out. This sort of rapid requires a process called lining. Basically walking your canoe through the shallows on a line. It can be a bit awkward at times, but it's no real hardship. Ray could still paddle down in his modern canoe. Plastic bounces off the rocks a lot better than cedar and canvas. But walking's a small price to pay for paddling such a beautiful canoe.
It's not very Hollywood, is it? Hollywood making this movie. You have this boat going through the most outrageous rapids head on into them. But then we try 20 of these boats and we break them. The reality on a wilderness journey is this is all there is. And what you have to do is you always have to put the boat first, because that's your means of getting home.
You can have too little water, or of course, you can have too much.
This is Split Rock Rapid. There's no way a canoe will go down that. And of course that was one of the second design criteria of the boats. First they had to be capable of carrying the loads and negotiating the rocks. And secondly, they had to be light enough that you could carry them past the obstacles they couldn't navigate.
Tying the paddles to the thwarts in this way creates a really useful set of handles when carrying the canoe. This is what's known as a portage, and yes, it's hard work. The voyageurs would have had to manhandle their huge canoes all along here. Some of the portage trails on these rivers are very long indeed. They must have been tough. Then once the canoe was in the water, they'd have to return for their load. In addition to their own clothing, each man was expected to carry 6 90-pound packs, 2 packs at a go. It was time for us to set up our last camp, and the end of the portage trail was as good a spot as any. Each journey finds its own rhythm, and this was no exception. I agreed to camp supper if Ray set the fire. A whitefish, fantastic. They're great eating. What a way to round off a wonderful trip. We'd both be taking home great memories. Negotiating just part of this voyageur route had been a fabulous experience. After dinner, it was good to have time to reflect.
It's a bit spooky to be camped alongside a portage trail like this. These trails were established even before the fur trade by the local Indian population moving through the forest, and then of course they became the highways for the voyageurs to portage their pieces, 90-pound packs, past the falls. I sometimes think that if you sat here quietly enough in the evening, you could see the ghosts of the voyageurs pass by.
Making this journey reinforced my understanding of what the canoe means to the people of Canada. For the original Indians, through the fur traders, right up to today, people have an affinity with it. It becomes part of them, a feeling summed up by former Canadian Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau, who said that what sets a canoeing expedition apart is that it purifies you more rapidly and inescapably than any other. Travel 1,000 miles by train, you are approved. Travel 500 miles on a bicycle, and you remain basically bourgeois. Paddle 100 in a canoe, and you are already a child of nature. I couldn't agree more. Bleak and barren landscape might not look like a mountain pass, but that's exactly what it is. I find it really strange to think that this humble trackway has seen so much traffic. In many ways, this is one of the most important roads in American history. Today I'll be looking at the role bushcraft played in its discovery. in the United States, you can have just about anything you want. Even in a small town like this, every possible convenience is on offer. What's more, you can have nearly all of it without having to leave your car. But even in this land of convenience, there are vast tracts of untouched wilderness, areas rich in the ways of bushcraft, and that's the reason why I'm here today. Heading into an area where no motors are allowed. The only way you can get in there is on foot, either your own, or even better still, those of a trusted companion. The landscape here is almost the same today as it's been for hundreds of years. This is one of the most important areas in American history. This is the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem, the biggest wilderness area in the United States. Almost within living memory, it remained unexplored by white settlers. It's an area of amazing beauty. The only real way to explore it, though, is on horseback. I'm following in the footsteps of one of the heroes of bushcraft. His name was Jim Bridger, and he was instrumental in shaping America as it is today. To me, he's a kindred spirit. He was a superb woodsman, an expert trapper and guide, a true pioneer. Only 170 years ago, these mountains were the stomping ground of a rare breed of pioneer. Men like Jim Bridger, entrepreneur and explorer, men we remember today as the mountaineers. Bridger and the mountain men came to this area in the 1800s, looking to make their fortunes. Their knowledge of bushcraft allowed them to live out here for months at a time, exploring uncharted territories and blazing the very horse trails that I'm using. That skyline there, that's the Continental Divide. On this side, all the rivers run down into the Atlantic Ocean, and on the far side of that ridge, they all run towards the Pacific Ocean. Significant feature. Many expeditions have tried to find an easy way for wagon trains to get across the divide, but to no avail. Extending 5,000 kilometers from New Mexico to Canada and 650 kilometers wide, the Rocky Mountains stood barring the way. The promise of riches that lay to the west fueled the pioneering spirit. The race was on to establish a wagon trail across the unforgiving terrain to open up the way to the Pacific. Very little has changed since the first time Jim Bridger rode through here. The only sounds echoing along the trail are those of wild animals. These would have been rich trapping grounds for the mountain men. Prey animals are fairly easy to see, but predators are much more elusive. But with sharp eyes and keen senses, you can see their signs. Stripped it off and eaten the cambium underneath. Classic sign that grizzlies are in this area. Come on. Walk on. States, there's so much wildlife here. And travelling by horse, well, it's a fantastic way to see it. You can really feel what it would have been like for the mountain men. It's incredible to think, so recently, this was the western frontier of the United States. Without horses, most expeditions through this area would have been doomed. It's the only way to carry all your equipment across this rugged environment. Wow, well done. Travelling by horse is a fantastic way to get into the mountains. Not only haven't I had the weight of my gear on my back, but neither have I had my weight on my own feet. But of course, this is a partnership. And Slim here has done his part, so I've got to do mine. The horse always comes first at the end of the day. These horses belong to Tory Taylor, a conservationist who spends much of his time in these mountains. Poles are designed to keep the horses close to camp. They restrict them, but still allow them enough movement to graze locally. With the horses sorted, it's time to get myself together. The mountain men that came out here really were remarkable. Many of them ended up spending most of their lives living in these mountains. To do that, they had to have had a very high degree of bushcraft skill. But it would be wrong to think that they had that before they arrived. For many of these men come from the cities. They had to be quick learners. In fact, most of them had to learn what they needed to know with the arrival of the first winter. One of the great things about bushcraft is that you learn that even in the most spectacular landscapes, beauty is often found in the smallest details. There's more sign of bear here, and just show you this wonderful footprint. This is the track of a grizzly bear. You can see how big it is compared to my hand. The size alone kind of gives it away. And the things to look for are, we've got 5 toes. This is a rear foot. You can tell that because these marks made by the claws are only a little way in front of the toe pad. The grizzly has longer front claws, which he uses to break open rotten logs and to dig for food. He's looking for insects, things like this. There are also human footprints here, which are quite fresh. But the bear is on top of the human footprints, so it's come along afterwards. It's great to be out in such a pristine wilderness. In places like this, I like to camp out close to nature, just under a lightweight tarp. It protects me from the rain, and there's plenty of space to spread out underneath. If you're living outdoors like this, you have to take certain precautions to protect the wildlife that lives here. Of course, a lot of people think that when you camp, bears are a problem. Actually, it's the other way around. It's people that are the problem. If the camps run badly, food scraps are left around, bears come in and become habituated. They get used to taking scraps or even gifts of food from people. And when bears and people come into close proximity, obviously, at some point, there's going to be a problem. Usually, it's the bear that ends up the one being hurt. Fortunately, at this campsite, I'm lucky because I can use this bear box to store my food, and you can see it's built like Fort Knox. It's actually a regulation that your food must be secured away from bears, either in a box like this or suspended from a tree. You won't always have access to a bear box, but there's a fairly easy way to store your food if not. Bushcraft is all about being adaptable. I learned this technique of throwing a rope into a tree from a tree surgeon, and it works perfectly for this purpose. The The most important thing to remember, though, is to seal your food in airtight bags to conceal its scent before you suspend the bags in the tree. If the bears can't smell your food, the chances are they'll steer clear of your food.
Well, that's me done. I've just got one last job to do, and that's to light a fire. I only need a small fire just to make brews and to keep me warm. And I'm going to set that up underneath the tarp. If I protect the fire from the rain, it uses less fuel. Less fuel means less work. I collect of these. You see where the branch of this old pine goes into the stump? It's what you call a pine knot. These are full of resin. When you sniff them, you can smell it. If you put those on the fire, they burn brightly and give you a good blaze. It's exactly the sort of skills that Jim Bridger would have had to use. Staying up here for months on end, candles would have been a precious commodity. If you want light to work by in your cabin at night, pine knots were the old-time solution. A few of these on the fire gives you a bright blaze. Now, as the sun's going down, it's the perfect time to use them. They'll give me a lot of light here. Also, they're very slow burning. They're very reliable fuel, particularly if it's been raining. The sputtering flames on the pine knots is a really comforting sight. They're a fascinating thing. The last time I came across anybody else using pine knots was in Canada. I was travelling down a river. At the campsites, when I got to each campsite, I found pine knots that had been collected and left by the fireplace. Now, this isn't something you see every day. This piece of bushcraft is one of those bits that are being forgotten. And I was intrigued by this. Never did catch up with the people who left those pine knots there. But it was interesting, there was a bond there between people who knew a similar resource. But at the end of my journey, I made a few inquiries to find out who else had been down the river recently. And it turns out that it was a group of Indians, native Canadians, who'd gone down the river to teach youngsters how to live in the bush. And one of them was using this skill.
Bridger lived out here for months at a time. Apparently, he hated going to town. He found the beds too soft, and if he had to stay in a hotel, he'd sleep on the floor instead. This is just how he must have felt. Out in the wilds, not knowing what tomorrow might bring. In mountain meadows, mornings are beautifully still and quiet. But not today. 200 meters from my camp, there are dark shapes moving. This is a pack of wolves known as the Washakie Pack. Although this has been part of their territory for 80 years, this is the first time that Tori has ever seen them.
In all the time I've spent outdoors, I've seen plenty of tracks of wolves. Even saw a fresh dropping yesterday. But to see the animals themselves, well, they're very secretive. You can count those experiences on one hand. So that was a marvellous sight. And what I intend to do is, once I've had some breakfast, I'm going to saddle up right out over there and see what tracks they've left behind. I can't wait.
Trekking on horseback provides a unique vantage point. From just these extra few feet above the ground, you gain a bird's eye view of the animal's movements.
I can see where they drag bits over that way as well. Small bone back there, coming this way. That's the rear pad. They must have made the kill somewhere near here. There's a lot of disturbance here. How many wolves are there in this area? We saw 6 this morning, and I think the pack is not much larger than that. There's been a few killed by control actions the last few weeks. At least 4 have died by the actions of the government. So how do you feel about that? To kill the wolf just because he's doing what he does naturally by feeding on different things. In this case, a calf elk, but in that case down there, a domestic cow. I don't necessarily agree with that. To bring them back into the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, as we have done here, is a tremendous success story. And it is going to take give and take on everyone's part. But 4 wolves for the price of 1 cow seems a little excessive to me. Yeah, I think I'd agree.
Yeah, I'll show you my fingers. And several times they went off. And after so many times, well, they don't heal too good anymore. Now, a lot of people think we're cruel people because we're trappers, but I think we're some of the best conservationists they've got, you know. You have to have a control on these animals. I don't believe in extincting any species. I do know that you have to have a control on them, because if you don't, boy, they'll take over, and then nobody can raise a crop or raise livestock, and different animals are killers, you know. Beaver they do a lot of damage. I leave the ones alone that aren't doing any damage, you know.
We're off to skin the beaver. Jake makes a living the same way as Bridger would have done. And as you watch him, you can see that he's every bit the expert.
See, you only make one cut straight on through when you're skinning a beaver.
His craftsmanship is born out of years of practice. It's exactly this level of knowledge that the mountain men relied upon.
It's good meat. The mountain men, they were short on meat. They ate all beaver meat, but they always liked to mix elk and deer and stuff like that, moose, and once in a while butchered a bear for the fat. That's beaver.
Watching Jake, it's hard to believe that he's actually 90 years old.
I've just got a little ways to go here, and then I'll put it on a hoop, just like the mountain men did in the early days. The only difference, we use iron now and they use willows. Here.
On Bridger's very first expedition, a colleague of his called Hugh Glass had a run-in with a grizzly bear that nearly cost him his life. He was mauled and left for dead, with all but the bare minimum of his possessions. Stranded alone in the wilderness and horribly injured, Hugh Glass worked miracles that became a legend. Finding his razor in his possibles bag, he used it to create sparks to get a fire going. Something like...
Hammer them in and hook them on there, see? That's the way we hoop them. Well, you gotta have it just taut. If you have it too tight, that'll kind of warp, and sometimes it'll rip these out. So you gotta have a little bit loose there. When that's dry, that'll be solid, you know. And so you got to know the right tension. Same way when you're building a drum, you got to have it about that loose, because if you make it plumb tight, it'll bust while it's drying. the Indians killed white men that way. They sewed wet rawhide around their head and staked them out on an anthill, and when that shrunk, why then their brains swelled up and they died. Wouldn't that be a hell of a way to die? I'd rather die from a jealous husband or something like that.
Should get us going, shouldn't it?
The old cowboys used to. See that hell? See how it works? And if the cowboys were riding where there's a lot of dry land, they'd let their horse drink out of their hat. We'll just let that behind. I go for now.
What have we got in there?
Peach gobbler and beaver stew. Yeah. Yeah. That's the cobbler. I don't want to stew. We don't want to burn it.
Let's have a look. Oh, look at that.
That's the stew. There you go, Jake. Good. Yeah. Got a good scald on it. A good flavor to it.
Jim Bridger was a renowned storyteller. Jake is no different.
Well, Jake, what about when you were a young man?
Yeah, I've been taught 2 or 3 different times where I walked 40 miles in one day. One of them I got to tell you the story about this. I got done early with my hunters, and John Bradford had a hunting camp up on Togety Pass, and there was quite a group of Mormons came in there, and they had a guy from a BYU football player. They was all telling what a hell of a tough guy he was and how far he could walk. And John Bradford knew me real well, you know. He said, well, you guys can brag your man up all you want. He'll never outwalk that guy right there. He pointed to me, you know. And, they said, you want to make a bet? And John said, yeah, what? How much you want to bet? And there were several $100 bet, you know. And so we left it. In the dark, we had a flashlight, and I walked over to Cottonwood Fence, which was 20 miles. Boy, it was right on my butt all the way, and coming out, we were about halfway out, and I looked over my shoulder, and I couldn't see him. So I walked back, and there he was sitting by a little stream, and he had his shoes off, and he had blisters on his feet, and he said, you win. He said, you go on, I'll hobble on in, and you know, I don't try going out and saddle 2 horses and let that gun. So old John Bradford, he said, see, I told you guys, there wasn't nobody gonna outwalk Jake.
Like Jake, Jim Bridger spent his lifetime exploring this area. Every valley might be the key to finding a way through to the west. Following his footsteps, I can see how difficult it must have been to find a way through for the wagon trains. It would have been impossible without the support of the local inhabitants, the Shoshone, a tribe with an incredibly strong tradition of helping fellow travelers. Leo, a leading member of the tribe, is making jerky from elk meat in the traditional way.
How do you do your jerky? What's your method?
What I do is cut all the way through this without cutting my fingers.
Yeah.
And you just kind of have a feel. These knives are just razor sharp.
Yep.
But we want this meat just as thin as we can get it.
So you're starting to unroll it, aren't you?
Yeah, we want it as big and as thin as we can get it. I remember way at the head of this plane up on top of it. It was from the first time I remember it. My dad was up there, and that's all he did. He'd kill an elk or something. There's no refrigeration up there at all, so he just jerked it all.
Once the meat is sliced thinly enough, you hang it onto a simple drying rack and season it.
8.
Yep.
I have one that you got. I'm gonna have to. That's a handful there. That's the way it's supposed to be done.
1. 2.
This ain't the first time you've ever done this.
3.
Feel that? I don't think there's nothing better than jerky just being out here air cured.
So I'll get a little fire going.
Yeah, once we get a good fire going, we'll take some green grass and throw on it, and I'll dive it back down, and then I'll be just a smidge from that. Well, some gentle branches. Yeah, that would be good.
Excellent. We don't want to cook the meat with the fire. It's just there to help keep the flies off. I've spotted exactly the right thing to light the fire with.
This is clematis. Reminds me of where I grew up in the south of England. During the fall right through to the spring, you find this on the bushes there too. This downy part, which people often call old man's beard for obvious reasons, is excellent for firelight.
There are more than 200 clematis species that grow from Europe to Asia.
2. 3. 4.
One of the great things about bushcraft
5.
is that skills you learn in your back garden can be used all over the world.
6. 7. 8.
Okay.
9.
Oh, we got these two. Yeah, ready? Yeah.
10. Smoke from juniper branches will drive insects away and infuse the meat with a delicate flavour.
2.
Yeah.
13.
With the protein taken care of, I've asked Leo to show me how the Shoshone preserved vitamins through the winter months.
We gathered up some of these choke cherries when I stopped here, and we're going to make some choke cherry patties. What I'm going to do is put a few of them in here.
The leaves, bark and seeds contain a poison called hydrocyanic acid, which is neutralized when prepared like this, but also helps to act as a preservative. You have to put them out to dry, so I'm making the rag that we'll be needing. The sticks need tying together, and there are plenty of natural materials around for that.
This stunningly red-coloured plant is the red osier dogwood. And like all dogwoods, you can do the little dogwood test, which is to break the leaf into 2 parts. And in the veins of the leaf, there's a latex, which holds them together like that. See that coming apart. It's quite a toxic plant. It's not one that we would normally eat, although native people did eat cherries. You can see they're white. And
2.
they are incredibly bitter. Certainly wouldn't want to eat any of those.
4.
More importantly, though, it makes a very good whipping for binding things together. It's incredibly flexible, and that's what I'm using it for.
6. 7. 8.
2, 3, 4.
What I'm making is a drying rack so that we can dry some fruit over the skillet fire there by the jerky. You can see how effective these withies are at binding material. I really don't know why we use so much man-made cordage. And there's so many good natural alternatives that we can use when we come out into the countryside. And in a pristine area like this, it's far better to use these sort of natural materials which will grow back rather than leaving some piece of nylon cord here. That's quite a rack you made there. Doing a good job.
7,
Small files make these
8,
patties.
9,
With that job done, and the temperature dropping quickly,
10,
we have to get the teepee out before the sun goes down.
1.
Teepees have been used for hundreds, if not thousands of years. These lightweight and movable shelters were perfect for migratory
3,
hunters. The poles could be transported or cut on arrival
4,
at a new house.
See, I was trying to get the door facing there. Yeah. Always east. And then we go back there.
6,
The door always faces east to greet every new door.
7,
We can go ahead and start with that one right here. Ready for more than 2.
Leo still uses them whenever he's out in the backcountry.
Well, but sure, Rowan. What I'll have you do now, I'll get a hold of it, take it, and see if you can stick it in that little hole up in there.
Yeah, the pole.
Yeah. That whole left, yeah, that works. Perfect. Hey, then we'll just go ahead and walk this all around to the front. You're a little taller than I am. Yeah, no more up there and tie this in. All right. Yeah. Take a little fat in here. Like you, we just can't reach that. Underneath the right here.
I don't think that's a really elegant system of laying a tent up.
3,
What I'm surprised is that nobody's used that method on other types of tents.
4,
I'll be darned. It's so simple and effective. You know, if you use a stick, it's easy to repair, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And, you know,
6,
they hold it up for good. Yeah.
7,
You gotta pull that can out inside the thing. Yeah.
8,
And just, you know, just kind of move around just to, just so we get to that other bit.
You can see that this
One.
teepee's been really well used.
Maybe that other one on the other side, just take it, hold your front here a little bit.
This one?
Yeah. I think this looks real good. And when we get outside, we'll pull it, we'll start from the front, right in the first tape.
Yep.
And we'll pull it out tight, and then we'll work our way back. Go ahead and put the front one in. Yeah, put it on a slant. Of course, the original ones had the skins on. Yeah, they were. And it still amazes me how they could have packed them around. Because, God, they had to have been heavy. I don't know how heavy that boat should be, but I believe it was pretty heavy, and that was just one high.
Just one high, yeah.
The bull boat was really heavy. It would have taken about 8 buffalo hides to make teepees this size.
2, 3,
Yeah, the lives of the Shoshone, the Crow, the Cheyenne, the other plains tribes are very tightly bound up with buffalo.
They were.
6,
And, you know, history says, and
Seven.
there's people around here that this was their main source of buffalo, great number.
1,
And when the white men did come,
2,
they figured that they killed buffalo, they killed it. And
3,
I think it worked. And this is just some of the remains of
4,
probably the early days of
5,
what was here. And as you look here, that's the
6,
marks that an Indian tribe most likely Shoshones had chopped into his head and took his brain, probably for brain tanning for the hide.
So they've taken the brain out here
Right.
to tan the hide of the animal into clothing.
Right, that's what they.
That's amazing.
Along with the buffalo, the Native American culture itself nearly died out after years of persecution. Thankfully, people like Leo are keeping it alive. Jim Bridges spent many hours around the fire, forging close ties with the tribes in this region. He was fluent in many Indian languages, as well as Indian Sign Language. Together, they shared their knowledge of these mountains.
7. 1. 2. 3. 4. 5. 6. 1. 2. 3. 4. 5. 1.
Part of the magic of bushcraft is just coming out and looking around,
2.
getting to grips with the environment, seeing what the potential is. Just down here, there are lots of fish rising, there are cutthroats in there. And it doesn't mean to say that we have to come always and catch them. It's about enjoying the fact that they're there, looking at the real potential of the landscape. It brings us very close to nature in a way that no other outdoor pursuit can.
This is always the best time of day to explore an area. Before the sun gets too high in the sky, you've got much more chance of seeing wild animals.
4.
Beautiful sight, bighorn sheep in their natural environment. And it's quite interesting because in this part of the world, the Shoshone here are often called sheep eaters. One of the things that they used to use the sheep for was making bows. The males have massive horns that come right up and go around, and they would cut out a tapering strip from each horn, which they could then straighten out, glue together, and back with sinews, the tendons, to make an incredibly powerful bow. There are even accounts of Indians riding alongside a buffalo and shooting an